Welcome to today's panel, The Future of US-China Relations. My name is David Young. I'm from Harvard Economics Department. I'm extremely excited today to be joined by four distinguished panelists who are experts on this topic. So US-China relations are often described through familiar binaries: cooperation versus conflict, economics versus security, democracy versus autocracy, decoupling versus interdependence. But the relationship is also way more complicated than any of these single frames allow us to capture. It involves trade and tariffs, technology and industrial policy, military and security, institution and ideology, very different domestic economic and political constraints, and also a very long range of historical memories. So the purpose of today's panel is going to try to speak not only about where US and China's relations are heading, but also what kind of conflict it is and what kind of conflict we're in now. What history can and cannot teach us, and whether cooperation remains possible in today's relationships. Finally, we're also going to talk about whether actors beyond Washington and Beijing can play a meaningful role in shaping where US and China is heading in the future. Okay, so each of the panelists is going to start with a 5-minute remark, and then I will moderate a few questions for all of us to have a conversation now. So I would like to start with David Weinstein, who is the professor of economics at Columbia University, also the director of Center on Japanese Economy and Business. David is going to begin by placing today's US-China relationships, especially in the trade domain, in historical perspective and also in comparative perspective to compare that with the US-Japan tension in the 80s and 90s. David, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and it's a great honor to be here. I want to begin by talking about an earlier conflict, which was a trade conflict with Japan that erupted in the 1980s and 90s. And if you could put up the first slide, please. And the message that I first want to bring out is that protectionism sleeps, but not very deeply. That many of the ideas and thoughts about China were ideas and thoughts that also pertained to Japan in the 1980s, starting with a best-selling book by Ezra Vogel, a professor at Harvard, called Japan is Number One, that extolled Japan's ability to be a leader in the world economy. There were a series of books that came out that were best-selling books. You could find them in any airport bookstore that were warning of the upcoming threat posed by Japan. So there was Clyde Prestowitz's book, Trading Places, How We Are Giving Our Future to Japan and How to Reclaim It. There was Pat Choate's book, Agents of Influence, How Japan's Lobbyists in the United States Manipulate America's Political and Economic System. MIT economist Lester Thoreau had a book, Head-to-Head, The Coming Economic Battle Among Japan, Europe, and America. And I could go on with books, but you get a sense of what the concerns were in the 1980s. Also, before Trump became president, he was a real estate developer in New York who was taking out full-page ads in major U.S. newspapers such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. And I'm just going to read you a little bit about what he was writing. For decades, Japan and other nations have been taking advantage of the United States. The saga continues unabated as we defend the Persian Gulf, an area of only marginal significance to the United States for its oil supplies, but one upon which Japan and others are almost totally dependent. Why are these nations not paying the United States for the billions of dollars we are losing to protect their interests? So you get a sense of the terms of the debate, and now we're kind of again entering into a phase in which some of these statements sound an awful lot like things we're hearing again today. And Japan's an interesting case to think about because despite all of that trade tension, I think there's no country that has remained as closely allied to the United States as Japan. And so a question that we might want to think about is why is this trade war different than the past trade war, is there a path for China to end up like Japan did? And I think that there's an important difference between what is happening between the United States and China and what happened with Japan that is largely about the national security issues at the center. So even as the economic relations became very tense between the two countries, the security relations were incredibly close. And Mike Mansfield, the ambassador to Japan, started saying in the late 70s, the US-Japan relationship is the most important bilateral relationship in the world, bar none. And this was repeated by ambassador after ambassador coming to Japan, emphasizing Japan's crucial strategic role and crucial position as an ally. And something that doesn't get reported that much in the press, but I think is central to understanding a lot of the conflicts in the Pacific is what is called the First Island Chain, which is the first chain of defense in America's Indo-Pacific strategy. And what that is it's a string of islands around China that essentially must be crossed for Chinese submarines and other naval ships to enter into the Pacific. And you can see the first, whoops, if I can do this, yep, the first elements of that chain, whoops, maybe I'll do it over here are Japanese islands, okay? And these islands are what MacArthur called unsinkable aircraft carriers in the Pacific, in which submarines have to come close to the surface and can get monitored as they pull out of China, and that enables the U.S. to track them. Taiwan, of course, is part of that chain, and Philippines is part of that chain. So for the United States, in its military strategy, that chain of islands cannot be broken. If you're sitting in Beijing, you're thinking, well, the only way we can get submarines and other assets into the Pacific is by getting through those islands. And so you have enormous tension over these islands. And so islands that nobody should really care about become major issues. Or another way of saying it is, if countries, they may not care about the fate of Taiwan one way or another, but Taiwan has enormous strategic value for both the United States and for China, and so that has become a flashpoint. As a result, I think if you want to understand what's happening in this administration, you have to realize that they are thinking about national security first, economics second. Yes, they understand that there are gains from trade, but compared to the national security issues, they think those things are small costs to pay. Nonetheless, what we're seeing is a dramatic change in supply chains. China's share of U.S. imports fell from around 24% in 2017 to 10% last year. We're seeing that what's driving trade patterns are tariffs and political concerns more than cost concerns, which was the way that, which was the predominant way that these things moved. Finally, we're also seeing that this disruption of trade patterns and other patterns have profoundly affected financial markets in both countries. U.S. market fell 12% in 2018-2019 in response to the tariff announcements. The Chinese market fell 21% in response to those announcements. We see similar movements in 2025. So clearly markets think this is having big consequences. And finally, we're also seeing impacts on consumer prices and other things. So I think we're seeing some costs clearly in terms of the economics, and what is now driving policy is very much about security issues in Asia. I'll stop here.
Great, thank you. All right, so David, you set a stage that's extremely helpful, that even in the domain of trade and tariffs, one probably cannot think about US-China relationships without bringing security into the question. I want to introduce our second panelist, Chenggang Xu, who is the senior research scholar from Stanford University, an expert on Chinese political economy, who will push this narrative even further to argue that the trade and current US-China relations may not even be possible to understand without thinking about the institutional forces, institutional origin behind it. Chen Gang, please.
Right. Actually, echoing what David just talked about, the security issue. So what is the meaning of security issue and where that comes from? So here I would just look at where it comes from. So I would say that this is actually a continuation of the confrontation between democracies and the communist regime. So although the Soviet Union-led Eastern Bloc, including here we are sitting, however, the roots remain. So what we are seeing in Taiwan, that's exactly the continuation of this whole confrontation. And if we look at the trade issue, that is also quite related to this continuation of this, the institutions. So if we look at the trade issue, nowadays China enjoys an unprecedented trade surplus. And this actually, the same phenomenon is at the same time it shows the strength and the weakness of the Chinese economy. The strength means is manufacturing capability. It's huge, gigantic. The weakness is related to is extremely weak domestic demand. So when both sides combine together, then here we have a terrible imbalance within the economy, and then China exports the whole thing to the globe. So then we have this global issue, and that triggers even more conflicts. So not only with the United States, but also globally. So it becomes an issue. So here I argue that the US-China relationship is much more than the bilateral issue, much more than the two nations. This is a institutional race. So different types of institutions. And talking about the Chinese economy, talking about the strengths and the weakness, these are actually coming from the same institution. So I call that as two sides of the same coin. And how comes it can simultaneously has these two sides? So then it is related to the particular type of a Chinese institution, which is a communist regime. But usually people thought the communist regime means the Soviet Union, but the Chinese is different. It's different from the Soviet regime. It's a communist regime, however, it's highly decentralized. I call that as a regionally administered totalitarianism. By totalitarianism means that it's a party state institution. It's top-down. But this top-down is only about the grand strategy, about political control, about ideology. In terms of implementations, it's highly decentralized to the locals. So here, there is also usually a confusion thought that may be a kind of a federation. So if it's a federal economy, then it's good. But here it's not a federation, it's a totalitarian regime, it's a top-down. So all of these bosses are appointed. But here, with this decentralization in terms of incentives, they use market as a tool, use entrepreneurs as a tool. So you have instruments for the communist regime. So the communist regime has instruments, which is market and also entrepreneurs. So given this kind of a flexibility, and also you have very tough regional competitions. Regions compete for the grand goal, grand objective issued from the above. So it could be GDP growth rate, it could be AI, it could be EV, whatever. So once there is a goal, and then the regional authorities, these are all party state authorities, they are going to compete. So then you have this kind of tournament competition. It's not market competition. So that's the key. And this tournament competition is based on the state ownership. State ownership, by state ownership here, I particularly mean the total state ownership of the land, the total state ownership of the banking. Here, remember, in China, the finance, the major part of the finance is banking. It's not the stock market. So the banking is a state. And also the total state ownership of the so-called commanding height sectors. And commanding height sector is moving. So traditionally, commanding height sector means mining, means upstream, whatever. But nowadays, AI is the commanding height. So to push forward for AI, they would use this regional competition, they use a market, they use entrepreneurs as instruments. However, that sector must be controlled tightly by the party. So that's a commanding height sector. So, but here, because this whole thing is backed up by state ownership, then it suffers from very serious soft budget constraint problems. So here, when people talk about the Chinese government debts, particularly the local government debts, the reason the local government debt is so serious a problem is exactly because of the soft budget constraint. The so-called soft budget constraint issue is essentially about the state ownership of the resources by which these state agencies will not worry about bankruptcy. When they don't worry about bankruptcy, then they borrow and borrow and borrow. They borrow too much, and then they accumulate the trillions and the trillions of the debts. And this is today's China's very serious issues. So it's both affecting the stability of the system and also affecting the domestic consumption.
Great, thanks, Chenggang. We'll come back to some of the questions about technology in a second, but it's extremely important to highlight the institutional sources of where Chinese economy is at today. So the third panelist, I would like to introduce another David on the panelist, David Daokui Li, who is the professor of economics at Tsinghua University, the director of Center for China in the World Economy. Daokui will emphasize the large remaining potential for the US and China to collaborate. And he's going to argue that it's the obstacle is not because of the interests are conflicting, but because the misperception are deep between the two countries. Daokui, please.
Thank you very much, David. You already tell the audience my conclusion. Okay, thank you very much. So maybe making my job easier. 5 minutes to answer a big question. What's the outlook of the two US-China relations? So still, I would like to take 20 seconds to express my appreciation to the society, IEA, to have me here, also to have the society for the analysis of government and economics, SAGE, to be an academic sponsor. Okay, government and economics in the area of new research, we are trying to promote one line to explain the tenet of government and economics is that in any market economies in today's world, the government is not only the referee, but also active participant. So in order for us to understand the operation of modern market economies, we have to understand the behavior as well as the incentives behind the behavior of the government. Okay, so also we have a journal of government and economics, already 4 years in operation. We are already in 5 years. We are already shooting to the 20%, top 20% citation record score of the whole economics journal. So please submit your subscript to JGE, published by Elsevier. Okay, we are doing very well. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, my quick answer. I think the U.S.-China relations are all going through three stages of collaboration or conflict. Collaboration, conflict, and collaboration, like dancing or music, right? Fast, slow, fast. Okay, so first stage for most of the past 4 decades, collaboration, right? Chengge and I were students at Harvard, students of Professor Eric Maskin, as part of the outcome of the collaboration of the two nations. And then came the current stage, conflict. And I believe we are at the very end of this conflict stage. We are moving to collaboration down the road. Maybe 5 years, maybe less than 10 years. Why? Because economically, the two countries have tremendous room to collaborate. The Chinese economy has tremendously high savings rate, right? The US, relatively low savings rates. Chinese economy being able to marketize existing technologies. US, wonderful, coming up with 0 to 1. China is wonderful in from 1 to 1 million. So there's tremendous room for collaborate. Chinese economy helping the US economy to rejuvenate manufacturing, potentially, right? But we are currently at the stage of conflict. Why? Why the two countries are having big fight right now? I think more fierce fight than Japan and the US used to have. Why? To me, that comes from a single most important reason, or single reason, tremendous misunderstanding. The tremendous misunderstanding is mainly in the US, also in most parts of the world. That misunderstanding is that today's China is positioned or will replace today's US as the superpower, militarily, economically, technology-wise. This is a tremendous misunderstanding. Why? Because if you stay in China, if you live in China, if you have any working relationship, making policy advising, like myself, you'll know for sure the Chinese model of socio-economic governance has decreasing scales of economy. The leaders in China already have hands full dealing with many, many problems in China. How will the leaders expand its ideology, export its ideology, or expand its influence to the rest of the world? Let me give you 2 examples. Serbia. Serbia is the country having the best relationship with China in whole Europe, right? I think this is a fact. But did Chinese leader ever tell your president in here how to manage your affairs? Did China try to intervene in the election, saying that, President Wu Chichi is a wonderful friend of China, let's keep him. Let's try to support him in his upcoming election? No way. No way. Only economic collaboration. Let me give you a second example. Pakistan. Pakistan is regarded, I'm saying literally the word, all-weather friend of China. All-weather, like taking a flight. You can take a flight anytime, all-weather friend. But did China try to influence the Islamic republics of Pakistan's election? Not at all. Not at all. Does China have top military advisors in Pakistan? 0. Does China maintain a military base in Pakistan? No, not at all. China is trying to make investment in the harbor of Gwadar, right? But so far, no success. That's the way how China deals with the rest of the world. I spent 12 years finishing this book, published by W.W. Norton in New York, trying to explain how China works and how it interacts with the rest of the world. China just simply trying to make the economy and society prosperous and stable, following 2,000 years of tradition of Confucianism. The system is difficult to be duplicated outside China. Chinese leaders' diplomacy can be simply explained by respect-centered diplomacy. China only wants respect from the USA. So I think before too long, US politicians, US mainstream society intellectuals will understand the Chinese intention, Chinese history, and the Chinese capacity. US will get rid of the fear about the rise of China. And about that time, whether it's in 5 years or 10 years, the US-China relationship will be back onto the stage of collaboration. So I am optimistic. I think we'll come back to that stage. But being optimistic is not enough. We have to take action. We are beneficiaries of the good relationship between China and the US. So let's work hard to improve our mutual understanding. That's why I spent 12 years writing this book. By the way, in this book, I explained how China works in English to audience like you. But this book, language-wise, is not possible. It's not accepted in China. So I have to photocopy this book. I sent to you, okay? Because the way the Chinese government explains itself is not the same. That shows why China will not replace today's USA. China will collaborate with the USA. China will not be able to become a superpower like today's USA. That's the future of the world. And I'm happy to answer all of your questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dao Kui. We're going to return to the question about misperception in a second. But before that, I want to introduce our fourth panelist, last but not least, Moritz Schullerich, who is the president of Keele Institute of the World Economy and also professor of economics in Sciences Po. Moritz is going to talk about the Europe role in this US and China conflict. What can Europe do amid the relationships? Moritz, please.
Great, and I want to start by saying thank you, David, for putting together this fantastic panel. It's a great pleasure to be here. And as you said, it's the panel with the most Davids ever. And I'm the odd one out, so I'm going to take my privilege as speaking as the outsider also, because I'm neither Chinese nor American. I'm the European on this panel. So let me really not use up my 5 minutes even. Let me try to make 3 big points. First, from a European perspective, we have a new operating system of the global economy. There are 2 750-pound gorillas in the world economy that do no longer play by the rules we had agreed upon. The Chinese with massive industrial policy and export-led growth model, macro stance that favors exports and an undervalued exchange rate that make it very hard for other countries to prosper alongside. We are currently 35% of global industrial value added is located in China. We're on track to 40%. The question to China from Europe is, what's your plan? You want to go to 100%? It's not going to happen. So the tariff response from Europe will come in one way or the other. There's another gorilla out there that doesn't play by the rules, and I think we all know what I'm talking about, both on the tariff side and on various other fronts. The United States are no longer the guardian of the post-World War II open rules-based international order. You all historians and others in the room remember Montesquieu's famous words: wherever there are gentle manners, there's commerce. Wherever there's commerce, there are gentle manners. So the idea that trade is not only an efficiency machine, it's also a stabilizing, politically pacifying idea. I think that has been replaced now by an idea of geoeconomics, which essentially builds on the idea that in a global division, in a globalized world economy, where the global division of labor and trade specialization with these forces have worked their way, there will be always asymmetries between countries upstream in value chains and downstream in value chains, between big countries and small countries, and these asymmetries can and will be politically used as tools of coercion, as choke points, as political tools. Again, we talk a lot about economic security in Europe these days. I think economic security is actually just is just a diplomatic word for saying we have a problem with China and the US, because these are the only two countries that use their economic power for political purpose. We don't have, I think Europe is not worried about being blackmailed by Brazil or blackmailed by Mexico or Indonesia. It's export restrictions that China has implemented within the last 6 months, and it's an erratic trade policy that's coming from the US, both with the aim of reaching political goals that are not part of the old operating system. So that's the first point, and now I'm actually struggling to keep my 5 minutes, so I'll be extremely short on the others. The European perspective look at these two gorillas on China is that the second China shock that we're talking about now really hits European manufacturing at its core. It's true that it's extremely difficult to differentiate or to isolate among the three factors that I've mentioned, which is the dominant one. China does industrial policy at a scale that no other country does. China doesn't have a good track record in keeping intellectual property rights. So that is a violation of the games that we had agreed upon. China also has an undervalued exchange rate and the macro stance that heavily favors overcapacity and export-led growth and export overcapacities in export industries. That's all true. There's a third point, which is China is just an extremely competitive, innovative, hardworking, successful economy. And that's well-deserved and respect for what Chinese entrepreneurs have done. So disentangling these three is not easy, because wherever you look, you'll find a reason to say, well, no, this is a competitive economy, it's nothing to do with industrial policy, or you look at the other and say, this is all about industrial policy. I think the answer will be, from a European side, it will be the playbook we will apply eventually, and there was an EU summit last week that had nothing else, was discussing essentially future China policy of Europe will be similar to the script that China has applied to the West in the last 20 years, which is, we love your products, we love your technology, you can have access to our big market. There's just one condition: you have to come here and produce here. And Europe will do exactly the same. It will say, we love your electric cars, we love your battery technologies, we want to have the competition, we want our consumers to have access to these fantastic products. There's just one condition: you have to produce them in Europe, and that's the condition for market access. That's number one, and we can talk more about this on the China side. On the US side, I think it's very clear that the European perspective is that the US is no longer the trustworthy ally that Europe thought it was. That's true both in the economic field, but also in the defense and security field. And with the big emphasis now in sort of everything that's security on technology, there is clearly an imperative for Europe to catch up. I think my prediction is we will not see a repetition of what we've seen in the sort of last 2 decades, where Europe was very happy to basically import American technology and rely on it. Now with AI and space and its central role for national security, there is an imperative to, unfortunately, I would say, break that tight link with the US and move to more homespun, homegrown capabilities as well. I'll leave it here, and then we can discuss.
Great. Thanks, Morris. We'll come back to Europe as well in a second. But before we do that, I want to return to the question that Daokui, you brought up about misperception. Okay, so a question for all the panelists. Now, great power conflict, or in fact any power conflict for that matter, comes from each side believes that there's no sensible settlement that's existing on the table. In US-China relationships, I think the central issue has been that two sides hasn't been sort of on the same page about each other's strategic goal. So the question I had for you all is, what does US try to do out of the China policy? Is US seeking coexistence with constraints? Is US try to use China as a way to economically rebalancing itself? Is US try to achieve technological primacy, where see China as a threat? Or US is really try to prevent China from both a regional and global dominance? And importantly, I think coming back to the misperception, what does the policymaker in China think US goal is? And the question can flip that, what is, I want to open up the question of, what is China's policy on the US as well, if any of you disagree on that, of what Daokui has described, and what does the US policymaker perceive China's goal in this process? I would like to start with Dao Kui, and then we can go to Chen Gang and David Weinstein, and then Morris.
Yeah, I think the U.S. policy swings from one extreme to the other. Okay, currently, your president, U.S. Richard, like him or not, right? He's, I think, in many ways more pragmatic, at least dealing with China. Not in other areas, I cannot judge. Dealing with China, I think he believes that Chinese side can accommodate many American requests. He believes that the U.S. Chinese side. That's why he's so excited after coming back from China. And he's always talking about his visit to China. And this year, 2026, most likely there are 3 more meetings, person to person, between President Trump and the Chinese top president. So I think that the US side is now moving to a very pragmatic policies approach dealing with China. And the Chinese side, I think overall, the Chinese side believes that US is a force to work with, not to replace. The US, in my book I explained, how we call America. We call America the old America. Old means respectfully, okay? Means the boss. If we call Chen Gang Lao Xu, he's more senior than I am. You know, when we were in graduate school. So he's acting like a big brother, right? We call America the big brother. America the boss. That's deeply, deeply implanted in the minds of policymakers in China. Lao Mei, you know Mandarin, right? You can explain better than I do. Lao Mei. So the Chinese approach to deal with America is like you're like when you go home, you have a grandfather. How do you deal with your grandfather? You have to show respect. China shows respect to the USA, frankly speaking, right? So I think that's why I'm optimistic. I think the relationship will be repaired before too long.
Chen Gang.
Yeah. I would like to talk about this issue from 2 different aspects. Number one is Taiwan. The Taiwan issue actually returned to the central issue since 1989. Before 1989, that was basically talking about the U.S.-China relationship. That was honey decade. So the Americans supported not only the Chinese economy, supported the Chinese military, and they withdrew all supports to Taiwan, although there was a bill supporting Taiwan. But what happened in 1989 in Tiananmen changed the whole thing. Since then, Taiwan issue becomes center. That's the security part. On the economic side, really the best year for U.S.-China relationship was the turn of the centuries. So at the end of the 1990s and the beginning of the 2000s. So starting from 1999 up to 2001, the U.S. government has played decisive roles in helping China to join WTO. So at that time, there was a hope that by allowing China, by helping China to enter WTO, then China is going to reform itself and change the Chinese economy into a rule-based economy. And China indeed made huge promises. So most of those promises were formal, so means written down. However, over the more than a quarter of century, all the essential promises failed. So China didn't implement. So in this over quarter century, there were lots of efforts trying to resolve the issues. And these issues including IP protection and also dumping, subsidies, state-owned enterprises, so on and so forth. All of these are actually written down stuff. So And with this huge disappointment, so then you have this revival of troubles. And these troubles are not only related to U.S.-China relationship, but also with Europe, also with many other countries. And these are indeed related to the violation of the WTO rules. And so then here comes to why the Chinese didn't implement what they promised. So then here we have to go back to look at what is the ultimate goal of the Communist Party's reform. The ultimate goal, actually, Deng Xiaoping made it crystal clear in 1982. In 1982, Deng Xiaoping said, our open up and economic reform is just the same as Lenin's new economic policy. So here I need to explain what is Lenin's new economic policy. Lenin's new economic policy was introduced in the early 1920s when the Soviet Union was in trouble, in deep trouble. So for surviving, Lenin invented this new economic policy, which means that you have a communist leadership. The communist controls Soviet Union, but on the other hand, about the economy, Soviet Union would allow for entrepreneurs to grow, allow for market economy, and attract foreign direct investments. And indeed, in the 1920s, starting from the early 20s, American entrepreneurs, German entrepreneurs, they all came to Soviet Union. They helped a lot. So the same thing. So this idea is that economy is not the goal. Surviving the communist rule is the goal. And so then we come to all of these issues. So why they don't fulfill the promise when they join the WTO? Because if they really do that, they are going to change the nature of the Chinese economy. So the ultimate goal is not to change the nature of the Chinese society. So the goal is to develop economy for surviving the communist control.
Okay. I guess we hear sort of even within the China scholars two different view of what China wants and left alone sort of what US might perceive what China wants, which makes it a structurally quite difficult issue. David, you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I'm just going to build a little off what Changgang said. I think there was a belief in that U.S.-China relations would kind of go the way U.S.-Japan relations went after China's accession into the WTO, and that didn't happen. And I think there are questions. While I understand that there's a debate about how what China's intentions are, it's important to realize that when China threatened and held back rare earth metal exports to Japan in 2010, right? That was perceived in Japan to be a threat to Japan's national security, and Japan created a cabinet-level position of a person who is going to be in charge of economic security, and Japan cut its reliance on Chinese exports of rare earths. When China threatens Taiwan or conducts exercises around that, that is perceived in the United States to be a threat to the First Island chain and the ability of the U.S. to limit China's expansion into the Pacific. When China has disputes with the Philippines, again, that is perceived by the United States to be a threat to its security framework. So I think that that's where at least the U.S. is coming at this, right? Now, what is also true is everybody sees themselves as a victim or as someone who is being threatened. So China, my sense, perceives itself to be encircled by that First Island chain that I just showed you, okay? And so we're in a situation in which there is a real security issue here, and you know, how we de-escalate is going to be a big issue. When I worry about this, I think about what right-wing Japanese in the run-up to World War II would have said about their situation, right? So their objectives, I mean, and this was repeated again and again, was that they were encircled by what they called the ABCD powers, which were America, Britain, China, and Holland. Holland controlling Indonesia, which supplied Japan with oil. And so they saw themselves as being encircled and trapped by these very large countries, and they saw themselves as doing something defensive. My sense is that China sees itself correctly being encircled by all these countries and is trying to break out of it. I understand that position. On the other hand, I think I also understand why the United States is very worried about what would happen if that does break out. And so I think we need to come to what the de-escalation that needs to happen has to be one in which we come to some agreement about what is a reasonable defense strategy. Now that said, I think I agree with Moritz as well that the United States is if anything has been proving itself to be unreliable, and and I think the problem with dealing with China is that in an autocratic situation, someone could change their mind and the policy can change, and I think that's the state of affairs. I'm not super optimistic that we're going to have an easy solution to it.
It's hard to, okay, can I tell me? Yeah. It's hard to argue against Chen Gang, my respected senior, graduate school, okay? But let me tell two stories, okay, for you to draw judgments, okay? Number one, in 1990, the Chinese Communist Party Secretary General, Jiang Zemin, seriously called a small number of scholars, communist scholars, telling them, please go home. Study whether we should drop the name communist from our party. And few months later, the meeting was called. And then various scholars gave various reasons, recommendation. In the end, Jiang Zemin said, no, let's keep the name communist, even though people don't believe in us. Why? We respect history. Because when China was very poor, very weak, in 1921, they drew the young scholars, a bunch of young scholars, including Mao Zedong, draw inspiration from Russian Revolution, they adopt the name communist. Second anecdote, our respected late Professor Janusz Kornai, in his last trip to China, he said, he spent, I think, 2 weeks. You helped him, 2 weeks in China. He drew two conclusions. Number one, your Chinese market economy is for real. Your economic success is for real. It's not the former Soviet Union. It's not the former Eastern European countries. Second, the Communist Party of China, CCP, is cynical. If I were you, I'd drop the name communist. You're no longer a communist country. It's a fact. So my point is that people have tremendous misunderstanding of today's reality of China. The Chinese Communist Party is better explained by nation-building country, nation-building party. In this regard, it's not too different from Trump, MAGA, right? Build nation in a holistic way with great respect for the rest of the world. So I invite you to visit China to see what's going on, right? Now, finally, about European perspective on China, let me help, really sincerely help you. You're from Germany, right? Mm-hmm. I'm a big fan of, I'm a big fan of German. My wife used to joke me, you are born in German. But I wear German shoes, Lowa shoes, everywhere, a pair of shoes everywhere. Right? I tell our Chinese friends, let me tell you two things, okay? Working for you. I'm still a member of German-China Economic Council. Number one, try to understand how Chinese economy works. It is not industrial policy. Rather, it is government and economics. Simple example is Tesla spent 10 months in Shanghai building up its production line, 10 months. Every week, the mayor of Shanghai convened a meeting trying to solve the problems of the Tesla. Why? Because Shanghai municipal government got to keep 50% of VAT, value-added tax, of Tesla. When Tesla gets into operation, even though Tesla is unprofitable initially, it pays tax. 50% goes into the pocket of the Shanghai municipal government. In contrast, in Germany, I believe VAT of local government goes into local company, goes into federal government. Local governments are not properly incentivized. In Detroit, city of Detroit, I spent 8 years working near Michigan. I know Detroit very well. The mayor is more concerned about the performance of Pistons, the NBA team, than the big three, now big two. Only two. Stellantis is no longer a US company. Chrysler is no longer a US company. Because the mayor of Detroit gets zero tax revenue directly from the big three. This is government economics. The incentives of local governments are totally different in China from those in Germany or in USA. Welcome to learn from China. Why not decentralize? Why not give some of tax revenue of the enterprises to local governments? Incentivize local governments, let them support local businesses. Now, my final advice to you, very simple. Learn from Denmark. I have Danish friends whom I helped 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. The Denmark Chamber of Commerce in China wrote a detailed list of requests from the central government of China to improve their policy. Some of them are very direct. You know, Danish people, very lovely people, right? Very direct. They asked my advice. I said, very good, go ahead. Let me add more. I enlarged the list of meeting. That letter went into the top leader's office, the president's office of China. To my surprise, he's got positive response from the president's office. Positive response, right? Saying that we do this, we will implement one by one. In other words, my point is that make your request to the policymakers in China as high as possible. They are willing to work with Europeans. They are willing to accommodate your requests, so long as these requests are for market, right? So instead of complaining, say, oh, China didn't do this, why didn't? Make your request. You get a response. Make your request a way saying that this is win-win. This is win-win for China to improve its market economy, and this is win-win for European economies. You will get a response. This is real story. Okay, of course, I'm at risk of disclosing some national secrets. Okay, I'm not supposed to. I don't know whether this should be shared outside. But I think this is good for the whole world. Go ahead, make your request. Go to the German Chamber of Commerce in China. Make the request. And I was in the meeting. I've seen your premier, Angela Merkel, meeting with our premier, and your CEOs of companies make very direct requests in front of our premier. Our premier said, yes, okay, we will go back. We'll carefully study this. So let me stop here. What I'm saying is that respect the center of the diplomacy. Economic policies will change. Free trade, all these issues, intellectual property rights, just make a request. Just do it. I'm optimistic. I think the relationship will improve between China, Europe, and China with the US.
Okay. I'm very much aware of the time. I want to make sure, Morris, you have something to say to respond to this. And I want to get you a question on technology before we end.
Yeah, look, I mean, it illustrates very well, I think, two key differences. We don't like to make requests at politicians that are not democratically elected. We believe in the rule of law. And we like to have procedures that apply to everyone and not to specific companies where the mayor takes a specific liking. And that's definitely a difference in the economic system. I think it is at the heart of what David also said. I think there was an idea after the WTO accession that China, by opening up to international markets, and I totally agree, by not having a communist, but obviously a market-based system, although a very special one with a big role for government and across various sectors of the economy, that China would democratize and become a state of, let's call it at least the rule of law, and maybe to some extent also a somewhat more democratic country, and I think it's fair to say that has not happened to the extent that people expected or would have liked it to see in the US, and the first big turn in US-China policy came not with Trump, it came already with Obama when that realization was clear. I do doubt, and I'm speaking here, I'm reading the situation as well. I have trouble to believe that the US, or for that reason, bigger parts of Europe, will feel comfortable with, being highly dependent in the technological space, in the industrial space, on countries that don't have, to some extent, the same value base when it comes to the rule of law, when it comes to human rights, when it comes to liberal democracy, when it comes to freedom of press, freedom of, we here at an academic conference, freedom of academic exchange and publication. So I think there's a limit to where we go. So coming to your question, David, and then hopefully we can have some more discussion. I do think there's obviously a continuum of the future of Chinese-American relations and what will happen. It can go all the way from, I very much hope you're right, from increased cooperation to something which I think seems to be the status right now, which is like a Cold War 2.0, to even, a more hotter types of conflict. And I very much hope that we can manage this. I think on both sides, there are questions about the political future of these countries. There's questions about the political future of the US. There's clearly, a governance system also in place in China that is that will have to go through transitions and transformations down the road. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and I would just want to make the case for Europe. 70% of world trade do not involve the US or China. So 70% of the world economy likes to do role-bound trade, likes to be in an open international order without strong-handing other countries, without exploiting asymmetries, without using these geo-economic choke points. And I think that's a big selling point, and going forward a strong advantage for the European economy, because we still continue to believe in the value of this.
Great, thanks. We have 4 minutes left. I do want to shift gear a bit and ask a different question, and I want to have some sort of thoughts for all of you. I want to bring the question to technology. Okay, so US-China competition has been spanning almost all frontier technology. Now, there's one view to say rivalry generates technological breakthrough, as we have seen during the Cold War. Some of the best technological breakthrough come out of intense competition between great power. On the other hand, you can imagine technology competition also brings a lot of tensions itself with fragmented standards, security dilemmas, and all that. So I want to get a sense of where you stand on this. Does US-China competition in the technology space a blessing for the world's technology because we get better technology as the intense competition and additional investments, or this is way more risk for already very hard to manage relationships that it can generate more tensions? I would like to start with maybe David Yu, and then we can maybe go in order.
Yeah, me.
Okay. David
I thought you said David Yu. So yes, I think. So I think I want to go back to something that Moritz said, which was that there are two 200-pound gorillas. That's true. That's the current state. But there are 200-pound gorilla wannabes out there. And I think what we're seeing in Japan and in Europe is a massive increase in defense expenditures. Japanese defense expenditures as a share of GDP are going to double and maybe go up more than that. And we're seeing this happen in Europe. And I think what we're going to, so I think there's probably a good economic outcome, which is that may happen as the world, reorganizes around a rule-based system. At least some of the world does that. But I think there's no question we're going to be seeing a big increase in defense expenditures. And one of the things about defense expenditures is that they tend to be very high tech. And as you said, there's abundant evidence that in the run-up to World War II, the U.S. defense expenditures in things like aerospace and microwave technology and computing and other things was what made U.S. forces so strong. But not only that, it spilled over into all the key technologies of the 50s and 60s. So, it's not my favorite way of generating R&D. I'd much rather you subsidize universities than subsidize defense contractors. But I think that that's coming. I mean, and I guess my one ray of sunshine in this conversation is that, maybe that is going to increase technological growth and productivity. But I think there's an arms race that's going to be coming.
Chengang.
I look at this issue as a industrial revolution together with institutional race. This is actually historically always the case, starting from the first industrial revolution, second, third, and now the fourth. So every time we can see that the origins of every time industrial revolution start from Anglo-Saxon type of institutions. There are reasons. So one of the most obvious reasons is freedom. And together with freedom means that there is an institution which protects freedom. And together with this institution, the financial market is the key. The financial market is based on freedom, based on rule of law, based on independent judiciary. So only when you have this kind of system, you have this kind of inventions and also finance. So if we look at AI, if we only look at the individual's inventions, then nowadays we all understand that ethnic Chinese people, not nation, played essential roles in AI. So both in the United States and in China. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about AI in China, basically we are talking about those people who fly frequently between China and the US, so mostly to Silicon Valley. So they are this week in Silicon Valley, next week in China. So basically there's no barrier in terms of knowledge. And that is why in terms of individuals, China is more like in the Olympic. So the athletes, they are very good in this competition. However, if we look at this issue from the point of view of industrial revolution, then it's different. So if we look at the industrial revolution, then you see the gap is gigantic and the gap is widening up very, very rapidly. Just to give you one figure. The one figure is the total valuation of the 7 largest AI-related companies in the United States. 7, without including OpenAI and Anthropic, without including this. So this 7 companies' total valuation is significantly larger than the total Chinese GDP. So you see the difference. And you can also add up all the Chinese A share and the Chinese Hong Kong H share, all of those stocks, total valuation add together is much, much smaller than the total valuation of the 7 US companies. These are without including OpenAI and Anthropic. So that is an indication. And also the gap is very rapidly widening up. And then talking about the relationship, so just history tells us that industrial revolution is a creative destruction. And this destruction is very tough. It's not everything good. So every society facing this industrial revolution is going to face tensions. So both in the US and in China, they face serious challenges. So what kind of institution can deal with the challenges far ahead? So this is a high uncertain.
Great. Unfortunately, we're out of time. we could really need 2 more hours to have the conversation on this. I want to make sure, Daokui and Moritz, you have time for final word on this question before.
The AI technology is truly, truly unprecedented. I think history will prove to be of little use in predicting the future in 2 things. Number 1, the threat of AI is truly unprecedented. The human race is really at risk. We never know whether the AI will become a society, interacting with each other, going against our human society. This is a real threat. I believe scientists, together with the economists, sociologists, we will come together in realizing this danger. That's the first one. The threat is common. It's go beyond any individual countries. It's for the whole human race. Second, for the AI technology, as Chen Gang rightly pointed out, it's by many, many Chinese, ethnic Chinese, right? They are sometimes in Hollywood, sometimes, sorry, not Hollywood, Silicon Valley, sometimes in Shanghai or in Beijing. They are truly talking to each other. So I believe with the burden of a sense of human conscience, they will come together with economists. We will come up with reasonable solutions on behalf of the human race beyond little differences among our countries. I'm optimistic.
Moritz.
Look, there's not much time. I think I'm with David in the sense that the national security and tech are so closely linked, and maybe it triggers, a lot of new innovation as we've seen in the past. I think that's definitely the positive, the upside, the optimistic case for Europe. Because all the areas that Europe needs to be safe from, from Russia, from other countries, is through developing its own AI capacity, its autonomous systems, space capabilities, the robotics, etc. Exactly the areas where Europe has fallen behind technologically, and now there's a large pot of money to develop that. Other than that, I think, the US is winning the AI race. It has 11 times the compute that China has. It has access to the chips that China doesn't have. A lot would have to go wrong for the US not to win that race, at least for the foreseeable future. That itself could be a risk, actually, in the sense that, don't want to go into dark scenarios, but that asymmetry that's developing potentially there is, of course, if you think about Taiwan, a risk that might materialize at some point.
Great. Awesome. There was one big question that we didn't get a chance to talk about, but I want to sort of just, for the sake of academic debate, I want to encourage all of you to read, on one hand, sort of, the very optimistic view that Daokui you mentioned in your book, and the other recent book that came out by probably the best historian alive today talk about the Cold War, Arnie Westad, whose book, The Coming Storm, which made the case that the world today we live in is remarkably similar to the world in the 19th century, end of 19th century and early 2000s. And there's never been a time in the recent history where a rising power gets challenged by a declining power, and unprecedented technological change brings this tension to the global economy. The optimistic view that Arnie Westad leaves us compared to that very morbid sort of end of the 19th century, early 2000 comparison is that the difference between now and in the past is that we knew how it ended in the past. And that hopefully will be the starting point of doing everything that we can to try to make sure the current relationship don't get derailed, and we don't get into the beginning of World War I, which really put the world into great strain for the entire century exposed. So please join me in thank all the panelists in their stimulating discussions and for your time today.